All right, so this is the last bit of our lecture talking about responsive web design. Where we left off, we had been looking at the viewport, right, which is the entire display area that the device has available, as in a browser, it's the entire space available to the browser, including this little slider. And we saw how if we go to our code for a box, and if we change this width, we saw that there's that subtle difference because the scroll bar is part of the viewport. And we also saw how to go back over to, let's see where we're hiding. And I'll break this CSS file up into different files when I share this. I believe we also saw how by using the viewport min type, instead of, because we can say something is 50 pixels wide, I can say it's 50% of the width. And I want to say that width is maybe of like the biggest HTML element, or we can say it's 50% of the whole viewport, which is what 50 VW does. And we saw if we want to have both the width and height of something change proportionally, we could use this vmin attribute that says choose the smaller value and make it 50 of those. And so then as I shrink one dimension of the viewport, as I shrink the y, the x shrinks as well. And we also looked a little bit at pseudo classes, where we can use pseudo classes for interaction events and hovering and things like that. So the last bit to look at is how we can make our text relative as well. And let me go ahead and get rid of some of these things that we don't need to look at right now. And let's go ahead and write a little bit of code here so we can see what's going on with text. And I'll talk a little bit too about the value of responsive units for text. So there's two different kinds of units for sizing responsive text, rem and em. And let me go ahead and start with rem first. And we can see a little bit of what that looks like. So I'm just going to go ahead and write a div, and it's going to have a class name of rem-size. And let's go ahead and put some stuff inside of it. We're going to need a couple nested divs. So let me make 3 or maybe 4 of them. And I'm going to use format document to make everything nice. And let's put some paragraph tags in here. And we're going to want a bunch of these. And let's put one in there just for fun too. I'm going to format my document again. And so nothing too crazy right now, right? But let's go ahead and add some CSS and use rem and see what happens. So we're all familiar of how to set a font size. And font sizes are usually multiples of 2. You'll see like 24, 36, 48. It seems to be specifically divided by 6, though I'm not honestly sure where that comes from. There's also a default font size. And remember that if we don't specify anything, the default font size is used. And one place where that gets set, I believe, is actually on the HTML document itself. And if we go to computed here, let's see if we can find, not sure if we can find it. They might be hiding somewhere, or I might not be looking in the right spot for it. But like if I wanted to on the whole HTML doc, I could set a default font size of 24 pixels, right? Or maybe 48 pixels. And so somewhere there's a default font size, probably of 12 pixels or something like that, that the browser is applying by default. So what rem does is rem lets you set a font size relative to the font size of the HTML element. So let's see this in action. Let's try 12 rem and watch what happens. So this got really, really, really big. I believe this is 12 times the size of the default font size of the HTML element. And if we go ahead and we set this here, it becomes ridiculously big. So let's make this something maybe tiny, like 2 pixels, so we can see it in action. So with rem, obviously, we don't need really big values. Probably the default font size here is 12. So 2 rem or 3 rem and so on. And you might be wondering what the value of this is, and the value is proportionality. Because especially for things like layout for newspapers, but just good design, a huge part of good design, and this is a huge part of web design, is typography and relative sizes. And so 1 rem is the same size as the default size for the HTML element. 2 rem is, I want to say, twice as large. 3 rem, I think, is 3 times as large. And that should be C, and I want this to be a D. And 4M is 4 times as large. And so when you've seen those sites that just have that beautiful layout where everything seems in proportion, it's probably because they're using REM or EM for the font size. And if I decide that, hey, I want to change the default font size for everything, if I make this bigger, then all these others get relatively bigger and everything stays in proportion. And this is also why width and height are potentially useful with REM and EM as well, because maybe I want to have a box that's exactly twice the height of this. So that's REM, and I just want to pause and see if there are any questions in Whiskey Questions, or if folks have any questions there. And I see a question in the chat about 16 pixels.
I think that was when you were talking about the default size for the browser.
Got it. Yeah, I think you might be right. I'm honestly not sure off the top of my head. And but that sounds about right. and so this is actually quite cool, because again, this is how you get like a nice layout where like I've got a paragraph here, and maybe I want a div here, and let's give it a class name of match size B. And let's put it here so we can do it with one of our bigger ones. And let's just say stuff like maybe this is an image or something like that. And we have a class now, match size B. And we can do, let's say maybe height. And what is B? B is 2 rem. And let's give this border of 2 pixels solid black. And let's make this inline block, right? So that it appears inline, but keeps its size. And actually probably this would make a bit more sense as a span. Let's actually see what's happening here. If oh, I suspect this one, right? Because the div above it, the paragraph tag with the wow is also block. We're running out of room. So if I go here and I modify this, and let's maybe make this display inline block. Let's see if that, let's see if this does it. Right? Because remember, block takes up the whole length. Inline takes up some, but it doesn't have width, and then inline block is a combination. So I could probably do inline or inline block with the paragraph tag here. And let's see what it did not like. So here's a good example, because even if I get rid of this stuff, well, let's just pretend there's something in there, or I could add some padding or some margin. But you can see that now I can have a box that's proportional to my text and have some really good typography. So let's just, I'm going to go ahead and comment all this stuff, but I'm going to comment it out. I'm going to put this here. And let's look at EM. So if REM was relative to the HTML element relative to the document as the whole, EM is relative to its parent. So let's start out with 1 EM and build this up and go from there. So this can get a little crazy, because since these are nested, each one is relative to the one before it. So down here, EM size D is not 4EM bigger than this, it's 4M bigger than this, which was 3 times the size of this, which was 2 times the size of 12 pixels. So this is useful where maybe like for part of your layout, you want to make sure that something is half as big as something else, right? For example, maybe your page title and then a header below that. Or for example, maybe, you know, our font size is, we're going to say we want it to be 1.25 rem. For some reason, we want em size A to be slightly bigger, a quarter bigger than the standard font size for the whole HTML doc. And then all of these I can make proportionally bigger to that, right? And 3em and 4em are massive. So in fact, if I put 1, that's twice as large. So here C and D are the same size as this, which is twice as large as our other one. So both of these have their place, and like for folks that are really serious about layout and design, they will figure out like the recommended typography sizes, and they will set that right off the bat, and that's like the basic unit of sizing for the entire layout, because text is such a huge part of design, especially for text heavy stuff. So that's again when you go somewhere that has like really good design examples. And let's see if there's a good. So there's all these rules that end up happening of how big things should be. And I was hoping to find a nice example, but like this is just an ad company that I know of. Like right here, you can bet that these are part of the same type system and have some sort of relative size relationship. And same here as well, where we can sort of see how we've been using the things to build something like this. And in fact, if we open this with DevTools, let's see what happens as we make this relative sized and we make this responsive. So you can see what happens. And in fact, we're going to talk about breakpoints in just a minute, but you can see, right, we've been talking about document flow. We'll learn about breakpoints in a minute, but at some point, the people designing this said, hey, this is too small to have it be two columns. This needs to now just be one column. And here we can see that the font size isn't changing. So do folks have any questions about REM or EM? Okay, awesome. Let's talk about Flexbox. And this, I think, is the fun one. And I will, after finishing this, I'll clean this up a bit so it'll be easier to go back and look over all of this. So we're gonna need some divs, as always. And so I just want a bunch of boxes. And I'm just gonna do, let's actually call this like a flex container. And inside here, we'll make a bunch of divs and I'll call this just item. I will just call that item. And I'll stick a number there so we can see it. And let's make like maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That feels like a good amount. And we're not going to worry, I'm not going to worry too much about the item class right now. It's the container where a lot of the interesting stuff happens. And I could name this whatever I want. I'm naming it Flex Container for learning purposes. So let's use display Flex. So first of all, the first thing we know is this reminds me of inline and maybe even inline block, but it's getting applied to all of the children inside this parent element. And I could assign whatever I want to those other divs. In fact, right now their display is block by default, remember? So for item, I could do display block. We still get our flexing. Display inline, we still get our flexing. Display inline block. I still get my flexing. Let's give these a width of maybe 50 pixels and a height of 50 pixels. And let's give them a border of let's just say 1 pixel solid black. And I think maybe what I want to do is let's add a little padding of how about 5 pixels. So now there's a little room here, right? And so one interesting thing to note is with Flexbox, Flexbox is about laying things out horizontally, handling the overflow, and just giving us an incredible level of control. I think it was Nika found a great article about Z index that I highly recommend. That's in the resources channel. And this site web.dev, I think this is by Google. And they have a great article here on Flexbox as well. And I would highly recommend looking at this. And it's interactive and it lays through things. And we're about to do some fun stuff where we can see how to change all of these attributes. And then like the classic article on Flexbox that pretty much all front-end devs read and go back to as a reference is this one by this site CSS Tricks, a complete guide to Flexbox. And honestly, it's absolutely incredible. I'm sure we link to it and it's really amazing. And I am going to use this as a bit of a guide while talking about what happens here. Flexbox is all about controlling boxes in rows and how we want to do that. And for instance, there's a property flex direction. And let's see what happens when we start playing with this. Row, I believe, is default, what we already have. What if I do reverse? Is it row reverse? It is row reverse. All of a sudden, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, left to right, we reverse the flow, right to left. What if instead of a row, I want a column? What if instead of a column, and let me, I think I'll leave these here commented out. I think that might be useful for folks to see. And this is, so Flexbox, you always are going to create a container. What if instead of a column, I want a reversed column? What if for some reason inside one of my boxes, I want to put some other boxes? Maybe I want, I don't know. That's probably enough right there. Because that's a lot. And what let's go ahead and I'm not going to worry about giving them a class right now, but let's watch what happens if I put flex container on this. And let's call this flex container 2. And let me make a new class here, flex container 2. And here, maybe I want the flex direction to be a row. Well, I need to make these guys a little wider. That's the problem right now. So let's like maybe 300 pixels. That would be 3000. That is too big. And let's see, flex container 2. Let's see what's going on, why our nested items are not. Probably because each of these take up too much space because they're all display block. So let's make a new class named tiny item. And let's do display inline block. And let's see if that helps with this here. And there we go. I can nest my Flexbox containers to get some really powerful layout. Right, boxes inside boxes. So 3-column layout, 2-column layout, you name it. You can control how the wrapping works. And let's say, let's create a bunch more of these. And let's see what our options are for wrapping. No wrap, force everything to be on one line, wrap, which is the default behavior, and then wrap reverse where it reverses the wrap. I'm not actually quite sure about that one. But let's see what happens with forcing everything on one line with wrap. Well, again, I think the issue just may be here that these are running out of room. So let me go ahead and make our item a bit bigger. Let's make it 400 pixels. So we have a lot of control over a lot of different things. Justify content is probably the most useful thing and the most often used. And justifying, you'll hear justify content, it's about spacing and organization. And let's see what happens when we play with this in our little one. This is probably what we already have here. I wonder if I'm running out of room. Oh, I apologize. That's going on the wrong item. We probably want this on the container. I'm not sure why it's not applying to these children. I might try it out on the bigger ones. Center and space between are the ones that get used the most. Yams, yes, sir.
Albert made a comment there, but that might be the issue there. It's item container is your class name.
Say that again.
Albert made a comment there, but it looks like you caught item by mistake in your class name.
Oh, for here on line 5?
Yeah, does that affect it if it's item flex container?
It shouldn't. And I actually want that because this div is both an item in another one, and then a container for something else. But I'm not 100%, to be honest. I would have thought that as we change
think
this,
is
yeah,
it the because you have display flex on flex container, but I don't think it's on container two. I think maybe you have to add
oh,
display flex to that one as well.
I think you may be right. Let's see if that helps. Thank you so much. There we go. That would totally do it. So some of the flex stuff was happening, but really, as I aired here, whenever you're using something as a container, you should make sure to put display flex on it. Thank you so much. And now we can watch the different justify contents in action, right? Where it starts from the end or the start, or what is it? Space evenly. This was so hard to do before Flexbox. I cannot emphasize enough how hard it was to do this before Flexbox, right? And here, these take up a lot of space now because this one takes up a lot of space. Let's go ahead and pull this out and put it there so we can look at these items and play with them. So let me go ahead and make these items a bit smaller. So I made them pretty big. And let's play with these justify contents here with this. Space evenly. Space around is a good one. So justify content with Flexbox is really, really powerful. You can also control ordering with Flexbox. You can change the ordering of stuff. You can set rules about how much things grow and if they get bigger or smaller relative to each other. So I could have one of these children be twice the size as another. And let me go ahead and demonstrate that. Let's do it with item 4 in the middle. Let's give it a class name extra big, and let's make that right here. And let's do flex grow. That's maybe 1.5. So the proportion, let's see what the proportioning is here exactly. Because that is awfully big for 1.5. So the issue here is that nothing else has a flex grow set right now. Actually, I'm pretty sure that is part of the problem. And so for item, if I do flex grow set to 1 as a default, now I think this starts to get more interesting. And maybe let's make this 2. So I may be running out of space here, or part of the problem might be that there's these 2 flex grow properties. Let's see if one is getting overridden. Yeah, the flex grow 2 is getting overridden here. I'm not quite sure why, but we don't want to depend on the order of CSS classes. So I would have to flesh this one out a bit to have the other things that I want. But the simple hack here is we can just demonstrate it. Right? 1.5 times as big, twice as big, 3 times as big. There's a limit because flex grow 1, I think, lets us control like these things can't get shrinked too much. But so this is really useful for layout, as you can imagine, because this is now proportional. And everything with Flexbox is proportional. And this is actually, so this is actually the cool thing about Flexbox is that all of these settings are relative. So you can set limits and you can set rules for how stuff wraps. And then the content in here will shrink and grow. And Flexbox is this flexible, exactly what it sounds like, a flexible box or container. And let me just check in and see what questions folks have. DJ, thank you so much for mentioning in the chat and the whiskey questions. You definitely, we need to add display flex in our container. Any questions around Flexbox before we take a look at media queries? Cool. So I highly recommend this article. We link to it. Again, it's pretty much the one that literally everyone reads to learn about Flexbox. And I think they just do a really good job of laying it out. And you can see the different options that you have here. I think this site is also by Google a very good resource, and it's extremely interactive, which I have to say is quite nice. And they give you a lot of options. Like I didn't get into it too much, but there's an alignment option with Flexbox. There's what's called the main axis, and that's the one that all of the things we've been doing affects. And then there's the cross axis that we can affect as well. So we can do all sorts of interesting alignments. I believe it is align content. Yeah, there we go. So let's actually play with this in the class so we can see it change for everyone, for everything, and we can see it change as we do stuff. So there's not a lot happening here right now because there's not a lot of vertical room. If I did have a bit more room, and actually I wonder if, I apologize, this might need to be applied on the container. That would make a bit more sense. Yeah, I think there's just not enough room in the items right now. If I give them a bit more height, that is too much height. That looks about right. And then maybe let's make our tiny items have just 20 pixels of height. We can play around with these in our second flex container. And we may just be running out of room here as well. But align items would let us move this vertically along the secondary axis. And this actually illustration lays it out quite well. So the last thing I want to talk about, and then we can wrap up, is media queries. And media queries are super powerful and really important. However, often what happens is we do not need to write them ourselves, because if we are using a framework like Bootstrap, the media queries are already written for us. But to go back to, if you all remember, we were looking at that advertising website, and when the screen got too small, it switched from rows to columns. So there's a way to do that in Flexbox, first of all. But second of all, it's not uncommon to use media queries to accomplish this. And let's say that when my screen gets a certain size, I want to make the default font size smaller. So maybe I want to write a media query. And in here, I'm going to say the font size will be 18 pixels. And media here, think as in like viewport, display media. And maybe I want to make this, let's make this dramatically smaller, like 9 pixels. And let's see what happens. And here I can see the size. So we're above our max size, our max width here. When the display gets smaller than not 8,455, but 845 pixels, the font size should shrink. And it would help. Let's make this a little more dramatic. And let me do a quick check on the styles to make sure that they're being applied and that nothing else is overriding anything. So let's take a look at font size. And let's see where this is coming from. So this is inherited from HTML. So I don't think this will get overridden, but let's see. Yeah, I suspect this one. Or the other issue that may be going on here is with React and putting the media queries in the app CSS. So let me see for just a moment if that's the issue that we have going on here. And I think what I want to do is, I don't think that is the problem, but let's see what we have here. So there we go. I'm not quite sure why that wasn't working before, but the server restart seems to have fixed it. So this is a very dramatic example, but when the screen gets smaller, so this says up to a width of 845 pixels, apply this rule. This says up to a width of 1245 pixels, apply this rule. And you can also use min width settings as well, depending on kind of like when you want the rule to kick in. But so this is really useful because the big CSS frameworks like Bootstrap have a bunch of media queries based around the screen sizes of all the popular phones and just phones and tablets in general. And there are sort of general standards for like phone or tablet media breakpoints. And so, especially if we're using, say, if we set a fixed pixel font size here, and then we use REM elsewhere, then when I hit the breakpoint and my font size drops, and let's make this something a little more useful, like 9. When my font size drops from 18 to 9 pixels, and I'll just go ahead and demonstrate this here. Let me, let's just call this big text. And let's make our big text be to REM. And let's watch what happens. Twice the size, right, of the font size for the HTML element. But when I hit the media breakpoint, it all shrinks, and it shrinks proportionally. So that is responsive web design. And the very nice thing about a framework like Bootstrap is they've already done the work of figuring out all of these rules to give you stuff that will look pretty good across all systems. But this is how you would build that and use that, and you'll often have to modify those rules. So it's really valuable to understand how this stuff works. So thank you all very much for sticking around for a bit. I know we ran a bit long. I hope that was a good intro to Flexbox and relative font sizes and the power that there is. Again, I think the next step here is reading this CSS Flexbox article. And these days, Flexbox really has become a standard. and is probably when you're designing layout where you want to start. I didn't go that deep into it, but by nesting Flexbox, you can get very powerful layouts. For instance, the classic 3-column layout that we've all seen without knowing. You can do it with grid as well. There's a bunch of tutorials here, but actually let's see CSS website layouts. Actually, I'll just draw it in TL draw. I don't know why I was waiting. So if this is our browser, and let me go ahead and change colors here. We might have we might have something like, excuse me, I want to get a different color for the different parts. That should do it. And let's have one more here. And let's have one more here. And let's say that this is our header. And this is the body of our website. And this is the footer. Well, what do we have here? And let me go ahead and get these proportionally correct. Forgiving the minor discrepancy, we have 3 boxes in a column, which we just learned how to do in Flexbox. And then maybe inside my header, I want a logo. And I want the site title. We've got a row with 2 columns, which we can also do with Flexbox. And by using Flexbox Grow and the other things we learned about, we can set the relative sizes of these things. And then maybe within the body, we have sort of a sidebar over here. And maybe this is like the main article. And then maybe we have something else over here. And these 3 vertical columns is what's referred to as the 3-column layout, and it's a website classic. And again, here we could have another row flexed right inside this column. And so website design and layout is all about just rows and boxes. And what you'll see is with Bootstrap or with CSS Grid, there's a grid system that you can use to lay all this stuff out proportionally. And the Bootstrap grid uses Flexbox under the hood, which gives you options to use it as well. But even just with Flexbox itself, this is an entirely achievable layout, not just to design, but to design and also make responsive, right? And then we might want a media breakpoint that says, hey, if this gets so small that I know I'm on a phone, let's switch to a completely different 2-column layout instead of just, which we saw happen on that advertising site again. So it will take a little practice, but this is where you can go, and this is how to start thinking about design and layout in terms of like columns and rows and boxes. And Flexbox can help you achieve that. What questions do folks have, or what's on people's minds? Okay, folks, thank you so much. I hope this was useful. I will get the videos up as soon as they start processing, and I'll clean this code up a touch and push it on up. Let me go ahead and stop the recording. And happy coding.